Let me commence today's event by saying, of course, good morning. That's the best thing to say on a Monday morning. Welcome, very much welcome warmly to today's event, which is the first in our 2021 Gambling Harm in Mind series. Of course, for many people will be aware, originally the foundation was due to have our once every 2 year conference in March 2020. Obviously, as along with many other things in March 2020, that didn't occur. We then decided we would do it in March 2021, but obviously a few months ago we realised with the uncertainty that we were still dealing with border closures and snap lockdowns and all the rest of it, that it was perhaps not really feasible to run a face-to-face conference at this time. We'll be hopefully doing our face-to-face conference in March 2022. I say that with all fingers and toes crossed. But what we decided to do several months ago was to run this series, the Gambling Harm in Mind series of virtual events. And one of the things I guess we've learnt over the last many months is that the remote world actually provides us with a lot of opportunities to also bring a diverse group of people together in a virtual sense, who might sometimes perhaps not have been able to make the logistical effort to get together in a face-to-face environment. So I'm looking at the numbers here. We have 92 participants in the room at the moment. That's just fantastic. I'm delighted. So welcome again to today's event. My name's Shane Lucas. For those that don't know me, I'm CEO of the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation. Been in my role around 2 years, 1 year at home, 1 year in North Melbourne. So that's been an interesting period as well to work with a fantastic organisation and all the partner organisations that we work with, many of whom are represented here today. As I say, I'm delighted that you've all been able to join us for this very important conversation about integrating multicultural approaches to gambling harm, prevention and support. I, of course, want to acknowledge the First Nations, the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're meeting today, and pay my deep respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge some members of our Foundation Lived Experience Advisory Committee who I believe are on the call today. And also just welcome and say thank you again to the very impressive lineup of speakers that are participating in today's event. We have with us Susan McDonough, Education and Service Development Consultant with Victorian Transcultural Mental Health. Welcome, Susan. Michael Kheirallah, Program Coordinator with Settlement Services International, one of the Foundation's newest partner organisations. Michael's also joined by his colleague Jaynelle Samuels, a Therapeutic Counsellor with SSI. We'll have Megan O'Keefe, Cultural Strategic Worker with Bendigo Community Health. Megan's a bit unwell, but hopefully Megan will be able to join us today. Liss Gabb, Neighbourhood Houses Unit Coordinator with Brimbank City Council, and her colleague Jen Sharman, who's the Reducing Gambling Harm Project Officer at Brimbank. Rita, Seumanutafa, Founder and Managing Director of Pacific Island Creative Arts Australia. Welcome, Rita. And Mandy, Zhang, Financial Counsellor with EACH at Gamblers Help Eastern. So thank you all very much for joining us. Now here we are on the 22nd of March. Yesterday, the 21st of March, was Harmony Day, a very important day on which we all celebrate Australia's cultural diversity. Now, the overall message of Harmony Day, of course, is one of inclusiveness and one of respect and a sense of belonging, trying as a community to provide a sense of belonging to everyone in the Australian community. But of course, we shouldn't limit ourselves to thinking about our own very personal role in ensuring social cohesion and racial harmony. We shouldn't limit that to one single day. We should commit, all of us, to thinking about these important concepts every day and to work as individuals and members of our community to ensure that culturally appropriate responses are embedded in everything we do. Today we'll be learning about a couple of things. One of them is my favourite buzzword, intersectionality. I had to ask Tony Clarkson to explain this word to me some months back. I think it's a word that is perhaps best almost put to one side and thought about as an idea. Intersectionality is a framework for understanding people's intersecting social, cultural and political identities and the prejudices or disadvantages that they face. So if we think about it, I think more as a series of connections rather than a word. It means certainly more to me. Cultural safety is the other really important thing that we'll be talking about today, and that's around trying to, as individuals, as communities, as organisations, trying to create emotionally, socially and spiritually safe environments for all of us. These concepts help us navigate and support the diverse needs of Victoria's multicultural community. We'll also be hearing from representatives of Gamblers Help and our Prevention Partnership Program. These areas of our work and our partners' work engage and support migrant and refugee communities across Victoria. It's a really critical part of what we do at the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation and what our partners do with us. So the aim of today, of course, is to learn. That's the principle of any activity like this that we try and run at the foundation. It's about learning and it's about sharing. So please be engaged, be curious, especially if some of these concepts are new to you. We're so fortunate to have with us today the people who have agreed to speak, because they're putting these sorts of concepts into practice every day. There'll be some time to ask questions. I believe on my email, I'm going to be receiving a range of things during the course of the event in terms of people who wish to ask questions. We'll do that at different stages of the event, and I'll obviously flag that as we go along. Please use the chat function on your Zoom to ask those questions, and they'll be sent through to me. Let's get underway. Our first speaker today is Susan McDonough. Welcome again, Susan. Susan's worked at Victorian Transcultural Mental Health in Education and Service Development, I believe, since 2009, including 2 years with a national multicultural mental health project. VTMH is a peak body representing the mental health of diverse people, communities and systems. As we all know from the release recently of the Victorian Royal Commission into the mental health system, mental health is an issue that is front and centre, I think, in the community mind. That doesn't mean it necessarily will stay front and centre in the community mind. So we need to take this opportunity to really drive a strong agenda in the mental health space. And as people working in the gambling harm prevention and treatment space, mental health obviously is an issue that we're very, very interested in and know a bit about, but not as much as people like Susan. Susan, you're going to be talking to us about equity and inclusion and my favourite word, intersectionality. Welcome, Susan, over to you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
We can.
You can, good. That's a good start. Let me just sort my screen out a little bit. And here we go. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Shane. I think you've kind of like almost sort of presented what I was going to say already in your intro. So
sorry about that.
No, that's excellent. This has really set the scene really well. So thanks everybody for being here this morning on a Monday. Very good to see you all. I can sort of see you all some of the time, so bear with me about that. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation here in what's called Brunswick in Melbourne. I want to pay my respect to the First Nations custodians of the country across Australia. And I also, I know from our little pre-chat, we have people joining us from New Zealand as well. So I want to acknowledge the traditional peoples of the New Zealand country as well. And I'm not sure if there's any other countries represented, but our thoughts are along the same lines there too. This respect is extended to elders past, present and emerging. And I also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded in Australia. So thanks Gambling, Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation, especially Erin and Tony for bearing with me and being a bit sort of at last minute in getting all the communications happening, but I've really appreciated your support in getting this together today. So just a quick note about us at VTMH, or Victorian Transcultural Mental Health. We're funded by the Victorian State Government. We're part of the Department of Health's mental health branch in that respect in terms of our funding, but we sit within St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne. Our brief is to work closely with mental health professionals, with service providers, but we also work with people who want to work with us actually. So we work in primary health, human service settings, education, community organisations, big and small, and also we work with government. So our brief is about cultural safety, and that was great to hear right up front from Shane in the intro. the talk about cultural safety from me today is really, I think, implied and woven through the presentation. We advocate for cultural safety in the delivery of services and delivery of mental health care. And this in yellow here that you can see, this is our vision statement, working together to create healthy, connected communities where no one is left behind. And we're just a team, a pretty small team, about 12 people. Most of us are part-time, but we try and spread our work right across Victoria. Okay, so there we go. There's the topic that I'm going to speak to you about for the next little while. And basically it's all there, the outline's all there in the title. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about intersectionality, trying to sort of look at it beyond the kind of buzzword, and then about equity and inclusion, and then come to that point that Shane made so well about everybody's business. What's our collective responsibility around these kinds of ideas? What does it actually mean when we're a direct service provider, we're a frontline worker, whatever our role might be? How does this kind of fit in with what we're doing? I'm going to sort of touch on that, but it's more about, we're going to discuss some of the concepts, and I'm just hoping that you can mull over some of those and see where this might make some sense to how you're already thinking. Maybe there's some things here that you see it differently, where you do see a similar view. That's what it's all about, having time to think and reflect. Bit of a one-way conversation, I'm afraid, from me, but maybe conversations you can have with others in the future. The things I'm going to talk about as well, I just want to say I'm really standing on the shoulders of others here. So, I'm the one person from VTMH, but as I said, there's a team behind me. And we develop these kinds of ideas and interests we have over many years. And we've done it obviously through reading and discussions and presentations, all those kinds of things. But we basically, really rely on the partnerships that we have with other people, with organisations. And that's really, a lot of those kind of ideas and thoughts are actually coming through me to you today. So it's also, you'll see I'm going to talk about a few leaders in the field and also some reports that are really compelling. So at the very end, there's a slide of references listed, and if you're interested, you could take a shot of that and maybe follow some of the ideas up. So just on intersectionality, I'm just trying to make sure I can see my time, but I think I can. Okay, just on intersectionality. Yes, it's a way to talk about interactions between social structures, experiences, identity and power. There's been, of course, the whole kind of area of social models of health and well-being have been thinking about these ideas for a long time. So in some ways, it's kind of a buzzword, but in some ways, it's actually a really refreshing, shot and reintroduction of the importance of these kinds of ideas. And I don't know that there's been anything quite so compelling in recent years that's kind of made its way into a lot of policy discussions. So it has been really, really useful. Intersectionality asks us to consider all the dimensions of a person's identity and to look at the connections between private troubles and public issues. I just want to give you may not use this word, but you may be thinking about these kinds of things when you just pick up and open your app and look at the news or whatever you might do. So I just want to take us through a few of those. This is something that just I noticed on the ABC app, news app. Women were let go in greater numbers during COVID. Now they face being offered lower paid roles to return to work. Reports like this one's out of the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare a few years ago, an extremely compelling report talking about the links between homelessness and Indigenous Australians, and a few sort of facts and figures in there about how 4 in 10 Indigenous homeless people are aged 18 and under. So you see what I'm getting at? Some of the intersections between homelessness, a First Nations people's identity, being young. This is a note about we have a website that's connected to our main website, which is called LGBTI Intersect. And the reason that was created was to just really kind of work through and understand some of the challenges in terms of mental health that individuals with multicultural and diverse faith backgrounds in Australia are having. So this is just some of the examples. This is why intersectionality is such a useful concept or lens or metaphor, however you want to see it. Another way of talking about it, and this, I like this one, this is Rebecca Solnit, who's a lovely writer. So she says intersectionality is about creating a conversation that invites participation for those who felt excluded and silenced. It's a conversation about race, gender, sexual orientation, trans rights, disability rights, religious freedom, neurodiversity, and so much more. And about how these things can intersect in a single person or interaction. So I'll just go back. So an intersectional lens is really about seeing identity as being very dynamic. It's deeply personal and experiential, but it's also structural as well. When I used to talk about this, when I was involved in sort of teaching health sociology, we used to talk about the idea of invisible, it's a very Melbourne metaphor, very invisible tram tracks that we're on, where we can feel sort of propelled, we can feel held back, we can feel pushed forward in the course of living our lives by our interpersonal situation or our social circumstances. So this is what's really helpful about intersectionality, because it's about trying to not just talk about the big picture, it's about the personal experience of the big picture as well. And it also relates to the idea of stereotypes, which can lead more privileged groups to blame marginalised people for the problems they face. And it can impede our efforts to address the sources of harm. So again, getting back to the idea of not just sort of adapting our systems, not asking people to adapt to our systems, but let's getting clearer about some of the sources of the structural inequalities that people face. So if identities are multiple, then the sources of oppression can be multiple as well. So these things can be attached to people, and it can be especially important for us to consider when people's everyday reality is not the dominant social reality. So intersectionality is a metaphor. It reminds us that there's many forms of exclusion at large in our community: poverty, racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism. So individuals and families can experience these oppressions at the same time. And people, this is another really interesting thing about the metaphor, is that people are especially neglected at the intersections of these. So it's like a disadvantage piled upon disadvantage. It can mean that certain issues, like the one we talked about before, about homelessness in First Nations young people, the thing about intersections is they're harder to see the straight path ahead of you. Okay, you may be looking one way, but something's coming another way. And it also means that sometimes people just pop up in terms of visibility, as if we'd never noticed it before, but they've been there all the time. They haven't been noticed in their own right, but perhaps noticed when there's some sort of other problem has arisen. Okay, so in our own sector, in mental health services, services are more readily available to people living in some areas than others, and language services are easier to arrange for medical appointments, but they're almost impossible to deliver, have around in for part of psychosocial programs. So community professionals and representatives are telling us that individuals and families don't think mental health services are culturally and emotionally safe places to seek psychological support. So these are questions about whether they're being heard, believed, and respected. So last year, in a session, I'll just move on. Last year we had a session at VTMH, which was around community voices in the time of COVID. And one of our esteemed panelists made this kind of point. And this speaks to the heart of what we talked before about cultural safety and intersectionality. At the end of the day, she said, who can I trust with my story? Who can I feel safe with my story? Who will hear me and hold a space for me and treat my story with the respect that I need? Because one of the most important factors necessary for any kind of therapeutic outcome from any engagement has a lot to do with how I'm held. And if on a larger scale, I'm described, I'm named in a certain way, and then I come to your service space to talk to you about the most disturbing, distressing things to me, and you're either dismissive or you minimize or you maximize the things that I don't even understand yet, I'm certainly not going to come back to you. And I'm going to tell everyone that's not a safe space. Okay, so I just want to move on now to talking about equity, the second principle that is in our list in the title. Equity, it's a word that means fairness. And when it comes to policy and service delivery, it's about creating conditions that allow people to live fulfilling lives. So in multicultural policy, many of you are very immersed in that world, I know. Access and equity frameworks have been on the table for a really long time. And sometimes they've meant developing specialised services for communities, and sometimes it also means making sure that mainstream services are responsible and responsive. We can talk about equity as being consistent with human rights and equal opportunity frameworks. And our commission here in Victoria sums it up by saying, we're all the same. We're not all the same, sorry, but we are all equal. So just two quick examples of some things that have caught my attention in the last few years, which just really put a new focus on equity and that you might find interesting as well. And one is the amazing work of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, which was released last year. And I really urge you to have a look at this document because it's a real landmark document. Because, you see the last line there, about achieving life outcomes for First Nations people that are equal to all Australians. So we've got very used to in Australia the idea of closing the gap. And we talk about that, I know I have myself, in talking about responsiveness to marginalised communities in accessing mental health services. But what does it mean to actually go for equal outcomes? It's a different kind of focus. And it's actually like wanting to address some of the structures that maintain inequality. The other one that is really quite interesting to explore is this idea of targeted universalism. Another bit of jargon, I know, but this is another piece of work that's come out of California and from a greatly named institute called the Othering and Belonging Institute. And they're also been really working through what are the ways to both target and bring people into a universal kind of standards as well, without at the same time imposing one size fits all kind of approaches. So I just raised those because they're really worth exploring. Okay. So this brings us to our last point. I'm just going to leave this up here and you'll see where I'm going to with this. Inclusion. And you're going to hear, I reckon, a lot about this from our great speakers that are soon to pop up. Community engagement, co-design, meaningful dialogue between services and communities. I just want to share this quote, and this is the, again, a publicly available document that's a really interesting and really important piece of work because it talks about what happened in the hard lockdown. For those of you who are not so familiar in Melbourne, when we went through this period of series of lockdowns last year, people that were living in public housing in inner city Melbourne experienced what was called a hard lockdown, and it raised incredible issues around human rights and equity, and a lot of distress in those communities about how things were handled. And, you know, what was great was that the Victorian government, you know, did have an inquiry, and there's been an opportunity to talk about this and reflect. This quote actually comes right up the top of the Ombudsman's report, and it says, from a resident who experienced things that didn't go as well as they could have. "We grew up here," he said. "We were born here. We know the system. We had doctors among us, psychologists, but the response," and he's talking about the response here, "it felt like, are we in a safe place anymore or not? We felt unworthy, just people who live in public housing." So I just put that there because I don't have lived experience voices standing alongside me, but there are voices out there that are being documented. So I've just got two last points to make to argue about why this is everybody's business, and I'll finish in a moment. We have, first one is like a self-interest one, actually, because there's lots of evidence out there that the more unequal a society is, the more that society as a whole is going to experience more health, be a more unhealthy society, going to experience more social issues on all the indicators of that. And you can follow that up. There's plenty of evidence about that. The second one, though, is actually really important. That takes us back to thinking about structures of power. So when we're working in services, whether it be gambling help, settlement, housing support, trauma counselling, mental health services, and so on, the question is, what can we do to take part in the struggle that addresses power imbalances? And how can we assist this process rather than endorse or perpetuate it? So what I'm saying is, I'm not just talking about health and human services finding ways to be more equitable in how they operate. That's an important thing. BTMH spends a lot of time working with agencies on that. What I'm talking about is what are the practical steps that we can take to be allies in addressing the causes of the causes that we see. And the thing is that as people working in services, it's not so much that we're just limited because we have our role of being individual frontline workers or whatever it might be. This is actually an opportunity to contribute to a broader struggle to address power imbalances. So this Ombudsman's report is really a very stark reminder and quite humbling, because the response that went on around here was motivated by concerns for health of the people in the towers and the wider community around. But it went wrong, and it can go very wrong. So good intentions are not enough. And what we learnt was, what was missing was the dialogue, the respect, the understanding, and so on. And this has been really well documented in this report. So I'm going to finish up now. So that was really about my job today, was just to explore some of these issues. Let's think about what are the other possibilities. How can we engage with realities that are less seen, less known, less heard? The good thing about today is we don't have to sort of imagine just how to do that, because we've got some great presentations coming up where people actually can talk about how they've done that. And I just want to take a moment to say this is a little bit strange to be presenting this way about connection and collective action through a screen, but as Shane says, we do the best we can with the circumstances we have. And I hope this has been of interest to you, and thank you very much for coming along. I hope you enjoy the rest of the morning.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that presentation. Now we've got around about 8 minutes or so for questions. I'd encourage again people to pop questions for Susan in the chat, and Erin will send those through to me. I've got one, but before I go to that one, Susan, I just wanted to ask you. I mean, you touched on the circumstance of the towers in North Melbourne, which is obviously very much our hood at the foundation as well. We're literally about half a kilometre up the road, have a couple of colleagues who live nearby. It was a very confronting period of time, I think, for that community, both within the towers, also the community around the towers, who have really strong interactions with the families and individuals that live there. You talked a bit about that hard lockdown. You also mentioned about the fact that Victoria, or Melbourne particularly, had a different experience really to almost the rest of Australia, certainly. And every time I speak to colleagues or friends who live in WA or ACT, I'm struck by the fact that their conception of 2020 is very different to mine as someone living in Melbourne through the extended period that we have. Is that something that you're have thoughts about in terms of providing services to a community across metropolitan Melbourne that, in my perspective, is a tiny bit traumatised across the board by the experiences that we had last year?
There are people who have really stepped up in various ways. I mean, we know that a lot of partner organisations like the community health centres and so on really did, and some of the mental health services really did try to adapt what they could, in response to the lockdown. In terms of the wider issues, I don't know, Shane. I think it's something that we really just need to keep our eye on, because it is a bit of a thing that happens where there's a crisis, there's a response, and then there's the sort of the drive to just get on with things afterwards. And I sort of take more what you're saying as there's some value in reflecting a bit on what happened. There's value in learning from what happened at all sorts of levels. I mean, one of the things that I think that this sort of time is an opportunity for, and I think today is an example of it, is around collective action, really. So at all levels. So, I mean, organisations coming together, not competing with each other, having, putting forward what their contribution can be, all those kinds of things. I kind of feel like that's what we need a lot more of ongoing.
Thanks, Susan. I have a question here, which I think is from Tony Clarkson. Is it? I'm not sure. And I'll just read what's been sent through to me. The idea that people are especially neglected at the intersections feels relevant also for people who experience issues with addiction. So if stereotypes lead to stigma, and stigma, as we know, certainly in our space, is a barrier to help seeking, how can the services that provide addiction support understand the concept of intersectionality to reduce stereotypes and promote inclusion to enable that support to be provided?
Well, I could just say, if I just talk to some of the practical things about how we approach this in our education and training, is there are some really helpful frameworks around some practices like cultural safety, cultural humility, understanding recovery-oriented and person-centred care. So I think there's just a lot that can actually be done in how we practice if we immerse ourselves in some of those ideas. Some of those ideas are things that they're very, very practical. They are taking the time to do extended psychosocial assessments with people, adding in questions where we make sure that we're being curious and that we're not making assumptions, and building that into our practice every day. So saying to people, look, I have this reality, I'm not sure, does this fit with your reality? Are there things about what's been happening for you that we need to know about that may not be obvious? It's about being willing to apologise if there's been misunderstandings or ruptures in how we relate to each other. It's about taking a stance of being a learner, but also, you know, being clear about the need to be competent and claim your expertise at the same time. So there's some of the practical things that we focus on in our education, regardless of, you know, where people are working. The second part of that is really around, it's not easy, this work. It's actually acknowledging that, and it's not work that anyone can do alone. So about organisations and systems making sure that there are structures of support for professionals working in any challenging area, whether it be AOD, mental health, homelessness, and whatever. So it's reflective practice, collective group supervision, all these things are really, really important. You know, we really try and encourage that as embedding that into the way organisations provide services.
Thanks, Susan. We've got one last question, time for one last question. This is from our own Tanya Fletcher. What would be your key message, Susan, to us at the Foundation as a fundamentally a funder of service rather than a direct provider of service? But what's our role there to also promote intersectionality as a way of working?
There you go. That's just an easy one. Okay.
Always ask you.
Okay. I think the answer is going to be in some of the presentations that follow, because particularly, okay, I've said those things about the kinds of practices to support and so on, whether that be, you know, how organisations run, have about supervision and networks of support and things like that. Of course, those things are really important. I think it comes down to setting up structures, I think, for dialogue, right? So what are your, you know, what are your well-established ways that you're going to keep the conversation going? Because remember, this is really, it's not about like an answer, do this, do that, whatever. It's really about being responsive and trying to, as I said in presentation, about understanding other people's realities. It sort of comes down to that. The only way to do that is to sort of keep at it, keep working at it, and also just be really open to that. So all the principles around community engagement, co-design, participatory frameworks, all that, it's not like those things are an add-on and that's just what you do when you run a community project. It's actually about embedding all of those things into how services themselves are delivered, how they're planned, how they're evaluated, and all that kind of thing. So if you're thinking on a big picture, that would be kind of what I'd be talking about, exploring all those participatory frameworks, and a lot of the depth of that knowledge is in the community sector, because a lot of people have a background in community development and so on. So that's certainly been my experience.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Okay.
Look, that's been a really important commencement and conversation for this today's event, and also for the series of Gambling Harm in Mind. I think there's many takeaways that you've given us today, Susan. The one thing I really resonated for me is that just the whole concept of safe space. How do you provide a safe space for people approaching you to provide service, but how do you provide a safe space as an employer? How do you provide a safe space as a family, as a community? So I think there's a huge amount of things you've put on our table for us to have a think about and to digest over time. So thank you, Susan, very much for your presentation this morning. We've got 10:41. What we're going to do, one thing we've also learned over the last 12 months is take breaks when you're doing online events and lengthy meetings. They can be in and of themselves exhausting in a different way to face-to-face events. So at 10:42, as it is now, we're going to take about 4 or 5 minutes just to stretch our legs, grab a cup of tea, whatever you might wish to do, and we'll be back on at 10:47 for the rest of our fantastic program. But thank you again to Susan for getting.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody. Okay.
See you all in a few minutes. Welcome back. I hope people have got themselves a cuppa. So, Erin, are we right to roll? Have we got the majority of people back in the room?
I think so. I think we should be good to go.
Okay.
Thanks, Shane.
So let us continue with our Gambling Harm in Mind series, our very first event for this series today, which is subject to, which I probably didn't say at the very top, but I'm assuming everyone is aware. We're talking today about integrating multicultural approaches to addressing gambling harm. So we had a fantastic start to our event, and thank you again to Susan McDonough for getting us underway and giving us so many things to think about in the space of intersectionality and cultural safety. And as I said, I certainly take away that concept of, even if the space is a remote and virtual space, how do we as individuals and organisations make sure that that space is safe for conversation, is safe for understanding, and that we all commit ourselves to that sense of really seeing the intersections of individuals' experiences, backgrounds, etc. I'm delighted now to be able to introduce a couple of our newest partners at the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation. During the course of 2020, we were able to undertake a process to secure an organisation to deliver for us a multicultural statewide service. The successful organisation through that process was Settlement Services International. And so we were delighted to welcome them on board in partnership with us at the end of last year. Settlement Services International is a community-based organisation, a social business that supports newcomers and other Australians to achieve their full potential. SSI works with people who've experienced vulnerability, including refugees, people seeking asylum, people in many cold communities, to build capacity and to enable them to overcome inequality in our community. As I say, last year we appointed SSI to deliver our new statewide gambling harm prevention and counselling service for migrant and refugee communities. Again, we'll have some time for questions at the end of the next presentations, so please send those through the chat system at the end. But I want to now hand over to our guests, Michael and Jaynelle, to talk a bit about their important work. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Shane, for the good introduction, and good morning, everyone. Actually, we are very impressed with the way the foundation, working, and it's really, we're talking amongst ourselves how good they are and how professional they are. So we are very glad, to have this relationship with the foundation. So now I will let my colleague Jaynelle do a very brief introduction on SSI, and I will do the Victorian part of it. So, Jaynelle, it's your turn.
Well, good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank Susan as well for her presentation. It was really engaging. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet upon today, the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, as well as the Aboriginal elders of other communities who are also represented here today. Settlement Services International, as mentioned before, is a social business and a community organisation. We work to support disadvantaged members of our community to reach their full potential, and we try to support communities where we can to build their capacity. We are based in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. And we have national as well as international reach with our programs. We have a range of programs supporting migrants, refugees and those seeking asylum, as well as those living with a disability. We offer employment and entrepreneurship programs. We have social enterprises and support young people in out-of-home care through our multicultural foster care program. Our disability programs include NDIS support coordination in Queensland, through our subsidiary, organisation Access, as well as in New South Wales. We are the LAC provider in 2 regions. As an organisation, we are very large in New South Wales. We have 800 staff across the states. And our team is very diverse to reflect our client base. We moved into Victoria only 2.5 years ago, so we're quite young in Victoria. SSI is committed to advocating for and working alongside communities across Australia to address gaps. So we like to partner with other organisations where we can. SSI also works with the UNHCR as well as other international advisory agencies to ensure that the voices of displaced people in Australia as well as other nations are heard. I'll pass over now to Michael and he will go into the Victorian branch.
Thanks, Jaynelle. Yes, as Jaynelle mentioned, that we have been in Victoria for almost 2.5 years, but we are expanding very quickly. And we have three different programs now in Victoria. The first one, it's called Immigration Advice and Application Assistance Scheme, which is we help people who come to Australia legally on student visa or tourist visa, and they're seeking asylums here in Australia. So we have like migration agent. We can help those people who are really vulnerable and they need help. So this is a program. Now it's currently in Victoria, and not just in Victoria, in Australia. And the second program is the multicultural foster care, which is it's a unique program which is within SSI, and it's we work with families from the same culture to accommodate children between the age of 0 to 18. So it's also another important program for us, because a lot of people or a lot of children, they prefer, you know, to be accommodated by people from the same culture, which makes sense, you know, to host them. And the current program, it's operating in the LGA of Hume and Moreland, and probably with the possibility of extending to the west. So it's a unique program for SSI here to work with the multicultural people or children. So, and of course the third program, which is the Gambling Harm Prevention Program, which is it's a new program, and we've been working with the foundation for the last few months, and we're very glad that we've been successful in this tender to get this funding, because we're trying to reach our most vulnerable in our community. We know there's a lot of agencies that have been funded to provide ethno-specific support, but our program, it's statewide, and that's why we're trying to work with every multicultural community, including ethnic community councils, Victorian Multicultural Commissions, and other multicultural service providers. We've already done so much works now, so many meetings with different agencies who already provided the service, to get a better idea how to provide the service and to make sure that we reach people who hasn't been reached by their own ethno-specific services. So yeah, we're working with our internal communication people to make sure that we have community engagement strategy, and also to make sure that we reach communities such as the Afghani or the Sudanese or Somalis, Burmese, you know, Indian, the new and emerging communities such as Syrian, Chaldeans. So we want to make sure that we reach those communities and make sure that they're getting the service and the advice they really need. Because a lot of people, unfortunately, from the States, I'm sure that we all know that they've been involved in gambling and they lost their houses. Sometimes they create a lot of family problems, social issues. So for us as an organization, it's very important to work across different agencies and different communities and to provide the services. And SSI, especially we're now celebrating the Harmony Week, it's important for us as an organization to make sure that we reach most vulnerable and most disadvantaged community and support them all the way through to have sense of belonging. So this is what we're trying to do in Victoria, in Australia in general. And as I said before, we're expanding very quickly, and we're building very strong relationship with different agencies in the States. And yeah, now we're having almost 12 staff in Victoria, and these numbers will be increased soon to more people who will be working with SSI. So yeah, so this is very briefly about the organization. I'm sure we'll give chance for the participant to ask question, and we're happy to answer any question if there is any.
Thank you very much, Michael and Jaynelle. And I'll ask people to send their questions through on the chat, and obviously we'll come to a Q&A session at the end of our panel of speakers. It's really great to now be working with SSI, Michael and Jaynelle. We're delighted by this new partnership on a very personal level. I've had opportunities now a couple of times to meet with your State Director, Sonia. It's also work that on levels very close to my heart. I commenced my career working in a law firm representing people who are applying for refugee status in Australia to the Immigration Department, the old Refugee Review Tribunal, or people applying to come to Australia from refugee camps around the world. So it's really important work, and we certainly know that gambling harm and the risk of gambling harm is a very live issue for people who are newly arrived in Australia or have been here for a time but are feeling isolated by many of the other issues that we talked about earlier with Susan. So thank you both. We'll hold fire on some questions now, and we'll continue to talk with some of our other speakers. Next up, I'm delighted to introduce three people who are working on Brimbank City Council's Changing Our Story project. This is a co-designed initiative that aims to raise awareness about gambling harm through campaigns and other community-based activities. So I'd like to welcome Liss, Gabb and Jen Sharman from Brimbank City Council, and Rita Seumanutafa from Pacific Island Creative Arts Australia to talk to us for a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. I'll just share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? Good.
We can.
Good. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming from this morning, the land of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those emerging. I'm just going to give a very short little bit of context about the kind of practice framework that, that the gambling project that we're running is being rolled out within. So what you can see here on the screen, I'll just take it to the PowerPoint, is you can see the framework that we are working within is a strategy and action plan developed in 2019 to guide the work of neighbourhood houses and community centres in Brimbank. And the diagram on the right here pretty much sums it up. So what you can see is the fact that we engage individuals in learning opportunities, and this in turn builds connections and a sense of belonging. And it is through that sense of belonging that we can then walk alongside the communities we work with to start systemic change at a local level. The really important things that we draw upon to enable this work are the enablers down here. So partnerships, creativity and innovation, co-design, self-determination and cultural safety. And I would say out of all 5 enablers, it's self-determination and cultural safety that really are the most important kinds of enabling agents that we use to ensure that we have the kind of impact that we're looking for. The strategic goals that we're working to in the Neighbourhood House and Community Centres unit are supporting children and families to connect and learn, supporting young people to connect and learn with a focus on those young people experiencing structural discrimination, creating a culture of race equity in everything we do. So while this particular strategic goal is not focused on a life stage, it's actually probably the most important strategic goal in that it is actually embedded across all the others. Building intergenerational connections is another one, and building a skilled and proactive workforce that actively represents the communities that we serve. And the last one, of course, being the monitoring and effective evaluation of our programs, and the participation in social research. So the space in which we are working is very much about having absolute belief in the communities that we work with, that they understand the issues that face them. They are the experts in terms of the way in which those issues affect them, and they actually hold the solutions to those issues. And as Susan was saying in her presentation earlier, it's very much about acknowledging our own positionality. And as a local government, which is largely a white-run organisation and a very white structure, that we do not know the best way of going about communicating and educating and supporting communities from a wide range of cultural cohorts. That absolutely it is the communities that know how to do this, and it is our role to support and enable and provide them the resources to do so. So understanding your own positionality is first and foremostly, I think, what enables you to actually embark on this kind of work safely. I will stop there because I have 3 minutes and now it's over to you, Jen.
Thanks, Liss. I've got 1 minute. Also a quick presentation. I too want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land. I'm on Wurundjeri land, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future and emerging, and anyone in the audience from the First Nations background. My role is a Reducing Gambling Harm Project Officer with Brimbank Council. It's a 12-month position. It's been funded through the foundation through the Preventative Partnerships program, and it's been coordinated through libraries and the great work that the neighbourhood houses have been doing. And really, because of the work that Liss has been describing, I have had quite wonderful entree into the communities. So the project comes as a result of the fact that Brimbank is in the very unenviable position of having the largest pokie losses in Victoria for the past 11 years. And our current daily pokie losses are at a staggering $445,000 a day. And this coming from one of the most socioeconomically vulnerable communities in Victoria. So what we are doing, as Liz said, is working already with the established relationships in the communities and working with those communities to co-design gambling harm awareness raising campaigns that are culturally sensitive and appropriate to those communities. And one of those communities is the Pacifica community. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Rita Seumanutafa from PICA, Pacific Island Creative Arts Australia, to talk about how she's been working with the project, how PICA has been working with the project, and other community safety messaging campaigns that PICA has been undertaking with their community. So, Rita.
It's me. Hello, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of which I live, work and play on here, and the Wurundjeri people and the people of the Kulin Nation. I'm very grateful to have been here for the last, I think, 19 years. I also want to acknowledge, as somebody who was born and bred in Aotearoa, I'd like to acknowledge the tangata whenua of the Aotearoa. And I can see a few sisters here on the chat, so I'd like to also acknowledge Te Rukutia and Rita. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing for the Māori and Pacifica peoples over there in Aotearoa. So I am part of two organisations wearing two hats today, guys. So PICA, Pacific Island Creative Arts Australia, a creative arts organisation that's about 5 years old. And basically we came together because a lot of us came over from Aotearoa with performing arts degrees, skills and expertise. And we found it really hard to find a place on the stage in Australia. So we ended up getting together and coming up with the idea of creating our own stages and our own work. So we've rolled out Pacifica musicals, theatre productions. We've produced, we've got a choir, a community choir that just enables and allows our Pacifica community members to kind of get together and perform cultural music. So we've been a bit of a busy organisation. The second organisation that I'm part of is called Vasa Consultancy, and that's a organisation that champions Pacifica community engagement, research and advocacy. Myself being an educator and academic, and also a community member and leader, I've been able to utilise all of those different hats to be able to pioneer and also drive a few grassroots approaches to a lot of the work and projects that I've been involved in. And one of them at the moment is the Brimbank reducing gambling harm project with the lovely Jen, Sharman and Liss, Gabb as well. And I've really enjoyed the time being part of the steering committee, working together with other representatives from the African communities and the Asian communities as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through my PowerPoint. So I'm just going to get to that here. Cool. I'm going to hope that everybody can see that.
Yep, you can.
Steer through. I think I've got a good 4 minutes, so let's just roll with that. So I guess one of the things is that PECA, I noticed, I told you guys it's creative arts, right? But what happened was that our Pacifica community, we experienced a very tragic 2020. Not only were we dealing with COVID and all the helplessness feelings that arise from COVID communications from the government, you know, we felt very much a left out peoples, and access to information was quite hard for us. We were also dealing with a tragic stabbing of a young Tongan 15-year-old, Solomone Dolfe Ulungaki, here in our area, here in Brimbank. So we were dealing with that, and that kind of brought about things like, you know, the need to advocate, the need to cut through the harsh stereotypes that were coming from media. And across the board in our Pacifica communities, there are very few members who are able to do that. So we are a very severely under-resourced community. So the communication issues that we recognized from the government were limited resources. There was a very slow process of translations. I felt like, you know, I set a labyrinth setup because it was like a bit of a maze to be able to go onto the government website and figure out the information that we needed to be able to stay safe, not be people who were getting fined all the time for breaking lockdown rules. Important messages were not reaching our communities, and we had minimal community consultation. Yeah, and so there were a lot of problems with the communication strategy came out of all of that. So PECA came up with a solution. And the reason why, if you're asking why PECA, well, funny you say that, because when lockdown happened in March, I noticed that there was silence on social media platforms from many of our Pacific Island organizations. And it came to the fact that a lot of our organizations are advisory councils and community organizations, and a lot of them are led by elders who were not very tech savvy. And when you go on lockdown, you've got to be on top of your social media accounts. You know, you've got to be online, and everything was on Zoom, you know, Teams, and Facebook is where we relied on a lot of our updates from government regarding COVID and lockdown. So PECA came up with, you know, a way to utilize the grassroots communications network. We really set about connecting everybody, using our own community translators, who are, very funnily enough, the ones who are being engaged by government to do the translations. The difference between us and government was that we were fast. Once Dan Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, once he gave an update and a statement, we were on the ground simplifying the messages, getting it to the translators, and then producing resources for community. We did that within the space of 3 days, and the government hadn't even engaged their own translators. So that was time was of the essence, yeah. We were able to engage our trusted community leaders and our ambassadors to help out. Also, our community consultation, being able to pick up the phone and ring up your local elders and say, hey, this is going on, what do you think? What should we do? And that's key to engaging and connecting everyone in a moment of COVID madness. And Pacifica appropriate messaging. So the process, Vasa does all the community consultation, government LGA liaison, design and management of process, and engaging with partner organizations. So that's my role, basically. I go into all these meetings, I advocate on behalf of my community. I also report back to my community, and then we engage PECA, and PECA comes in and with its team of creators, produces the content and then delivers the content. And we do it in such a fast pace because we're at risk and we're a very vulnerable community. So we're always mindful of this about us. So this is what PECA looks like. You know, we do festival marches, we do cultural ceremonies. This is at the Immigration Museum, welcoming a Samoan sacred tattoo exhibition into Immigration Museum. So we did the AVA ceremony, and this is theatre production right here. So we're across the board on all these creative platforms, which is a really good outlet for our people. And then this is an example of some of the digital posters that we produced for COVID. Here's a poster about keeping each other safe. Just quick and simple reminders. And then this is the Tongan version right here. You will notice the use of the patterns, the colors, the brightness. When our people see messaging and posters and they see a familiar element to it, they will then go ahead and read the rest of the poster. And that's what it all came down to. We really wanted the people to understand this poster, this message, this is for you. So this played a very strong part on our social media campaign. We had little community vlogs. So this is Seumanutafa, and he just puts together his own little community safety messages. It's a reminder to the community, hey guys, there's a food bank service happening in Brimbank on this day, ring this number by this time. We also have a lack of Pacific community radio stations. So this woman here, Mele Makelesi Kavapalu Fachi, what she did was she actually went and just created her own Tongan radio program on Facebook. So she goes live every Saturdays for 1 hour. And basically the information that both Skiwi and Mele get, what I do is I actually get the updates and then I put together, oops, that was my alarm for my 6 minutes, guys, sorry. And then I put together a script for them and then they go and roll out the messages to community. So, and this is an emergency relief. We will be providing emergency food relief to vulnerable families in our community. So that's just an example of the poster that we would produce and a photo of some of our helpers. And so with the current project, so we're transferring the process that we did with COVID and we're utilising that with this current project with Jen and Liss. And it's 3 deliverables at the moment. So we're at the stage of just locking in the key messages, which I'm doing with the community. I'm having discussions with the elders and asking them, if you see this type of messaging, and this messaging is like how much a poke machine earns, you know, per annum, or how many poke machines per capita in Brimbank, or how many poke venues there are in Brimbank. And just having that discussion with the elders and getting their thoughts. How would you feel if you saw that type of messaging? And what do you think is the best way? How would you like to receive that message? And what we've come down to with the 3 deliverables is a short video message, digital posters, and translated resources that are already in venues, but trying to get them translated and everything packaged in a Pasifika appropriate way, and utilising the creatives from PECA. And that's basically my quick presentation there, guys. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thank you very much, Rita, and you have covered a lot of territory in only a few minutes. So thank you so much for doing that. We will come back to some questions for the 3 of you at the end of today's session. But for the moment, we'll continue to move through our program. But thanks again to Rita and to Liss and to Jen for those presentations. And it really just is. Reminds me that, you know, whilst we at the foundation are not embedded in community as an organisation ourselves, we are so privileged to work with a range of organisations that are absolutely embedded in community and generating really practical resources and practical programs for people to try and steer them also away from falling into or being at risk of gambling harm. So thank you very much for your work. We'll continue on. So again, please continue to pop any questions in the chat and they'll come back to me at the end of our program. I now want to introduce Mandy Zhang, who's a financial counsellor at Gamblers Help Eastern. Specialist service provides information and advice and also advocates for people experiencing gambling related financial difficulties. So Mandy, I'll hand over to you to talk about the work that you're doing with a suite of multicultural clients, especially obviously those in the Chinese speaking communities.
Thank you, everyone. I quickly share my PowerPoint here. Everyone can see that? All right. My name is Mandy. I am from EACH Finance Counseling Service Program. Today we talk about challenge and opportunity in service deliveries to migrants and refugees. And as a finance counselor, it's perspective, and also we cover the COVID side of it. And actually, during these few years, I'm working in the sector. Why I can't go to the next slide? Sorry, I'll have to quickly. Can you see that again? Or not really?
We could see the first slide, Mandy, but now I can't see.
Yeah, I don't know why oh, here we go.
Yep, that's come back.
Yeah, cool. I would say that the challenge actually working in the new migrants and refugee on people actually don't speak the English. I found that as a finance counselor perspective is a money priority. People will borrow money from family and friends and apply new loans and credit cards, pay off the old debt, and instead seeking the financial help. And some people choose to pay bill on time over spending less money on their food, on spending on their children. And why actually have that money priority problem? Because they don't know their financial right and responsibility. And as they don't speak the language, and of course they don't know where to seek help on their affair, the creditor will take legal action against them. And they often high on try to resolve their financial issue until no, on limited options left before they seek help. And migrants and refugee community, they don't know about financial hardship support on surface because maybe there is not exist in their original country. That's why they don't know where and how to seek help. Even they unsure. So I contact the service provider to tell them what's going on what happened if they actually disconnect my power on just contact me for ask me the money I have to pay, but I don't have the money to pay, something like that. And the last point about the challenge, I would say that especially in Chinese community is a shame and stigma. Not having and losing faith is the Chinese concept of faith refers to cultural understanding of respect, honor, and social standards. It's something you will hear people talk about all the time, and not having faith is not having a good reputation on having a bad social standard. And losing faith actually is losing the social status on hurting someone's reputation. As we are talking about shame here, it's not just personal feeling, as relates to entire family, and sometimes can be past the generation as well. And I think the next thing I would like to share is regarding the case study. And this is the based on real case study, of course, the names and some details can change. Lee is 35 years old who immigrates to Melbourne with his parents 3 years ago, and he's a family lawyer. And parents are retired. Lee's parents moved to Melbourne for better retirement, also hoping that Liss can find a wife and start a family here. Parents starting to realize that Liss came home very late at night and received a lot of unpaid bills and bank letters. Parents don't understand the English, but this situation has been continuing more than 9 months. Finally, parents find out that Liss have a gambling problem, and father thinks that is a family shame and losing faith, but the mother actually want to get help. The father stated to Liss he would sell his family house and withdraw all his retirement funds to help Liss pay off his debt without engaging any external service. So this is classic examples to explain that they keep everything inside and they don't want to seeking help from outside. And try to think about the case study. Here actually is some opportunity for service deliveries, kind of like if Liss' parents or the mother or father seeing any of this promotion online, like telling how can reduce some of degree of the stigma and shame, promotion on their media social network, like particular in Chinese, they would say Weibo, WeChat, and Red. Red is very new social networking, actually like Instagram. but a lot of the people using that right now. And provide their own language practical support information online, so like utility relief grant, rental relief grant, business support grant, and Money Smart website, which those information actually, most of people in Chinese community, they don't know any of these. So that's why it would be great to put it online on the other network. If they can see actually those information, then possibly they would have more motivations to seeking help. And using COVID-19 as a starting point to normalize the financial hardship, bringing up the awareness of seeking help earlier. And that's actually how Chinese peer connections come involved. The Chinese Peer Connection program support people from the Chinese community who experience gambling harm, and that actually based on the concept peer connection in Northern. And CPC's telephone service can reduce Chinese shame and stigma, also prevents losing face. All right, here I would like to highlight the sentence about get support in English, but actually we're using contact us in Chinese to telling people that getting help, because we are find out that if we are doing the direct translations, get support in Chinese, no one will gonna contact us. So that's why I'm saying that that sentence, giving up Google on direct translation, but focus on making sense to the community. And COVID impact, actually CPC changing a new flyer, and also we're changing a little bit about the intake process as well. We provide actually practical information and support to reduce people's anxiety and lower their Gabb. And also we up this report during the initial phone call. It's kind of like, for example, checking in people's and mental health, finance and relationship, try to provide that, what's that called, integrates service and checking in with people, the other side of it, not just gambling side of it. And also this is the next point is actual what CPC have been done during the COVID. In the second lockdown in June, and we helping students in the community manage a challenge that COVID presents. CPC actually create 4 short video to support students both in English and Chinese. One of the short video produced was maintain good health and well-being. The video focused on 3 main topics: exercise, food, and sleep. That is the information we try to provide and promote some integrated information and resources as well. And the last slide is, here we go, our Chinese Peer Connection Program, contact number and email. And also we have Federation of Chinese Association. They are also providing the gambling counseling specific for Chinese community as well. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. As I said earlier, I think before we sort of officially commenced, I was very lucky to go to the 10-year anniversary of Chinese Peer Connections at the back end of 2019. An incredibly impressive program, and driven so much also by many volunteer counsellors working obviously closely with each. And I think you've raised a couple of things there, Mandy, that might also be things we can talk about later in today's session with regard to how perhaps the opportunity of COVID and the use of telehealth has actually been a real positive to break down some of those issues around stigma and to break down some of those barriers around help seeking, not just obviously in the Chinese community where those issues are of particular relevance, but I think in many, many communities. Thank you again for your presentation, Mandy. We'll come back to some questions at the end of today's session. Our last presenter for today, and I'm very delighted she's been able to join us because she's not been feeling 100%. But again, one of the wonderful things is of a remote and online activity is you don't have to get out of your sickbed. You can possibly present from your sickbed. And so with that, we have Megan O'Keefe is joining us. Megan's a cultural strategic worker with Bendigo Community Health. And Megan's going to be talking to us about successful engagement and also the complexity of working with refugee communities. So over to you, Megan.
Thank you, guys. Sorry, I'll just get my screen on too if I can. a second. All right. So first of all, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet here in Bendigo. So the Dja-Dja-Wurrung and the Taronga-Wurrung country is where we are. I'd like to acknowledge and extend my appreciation to the Dja-Dja-Wurrung people and the traditional owners of the land that we are standing on today. Today we pay our respects to leaders and elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the tradition, the culture and the hopes of all Dja-Dja-Wurrung peoples. All right, well, I wanted to thank the VRGF today for having us, and what I'm going to talk about a little bit is just, I guess, Bendigo's journey in refugee settlement. So where we probably differ a little bit from a lot of you guys who are in metropolitan Melbourne is Bendigo is relatively new to the multicultural space. I grew up in Bendigo, as did most people who lived here, and back in my day you would have been lucky to see anyone from a different culture at school with you. I went to a school of 500 people, and I don't believe we would have been lucky to have one person from multicultural background present at that school at the time. And so where Bendigo has come since then is that we welcomed our first refugee families to Bendigo in 2007, and they would have been one of the first multicultural presence in Bendigo. And that was one family and 2 monks from the Karen-Thai border. And they were really our first experience as a community of having to adjust and work in the multicultural space. So during that time, Bendigo Community Health has managed a suite of refugee services. We have, we're part of the Refugee Health Network. We have been part of the settlement experience itself, or the settlement process itself. And we also are very much involved in building the cultural diversity of Bendigo as a whole. So for those of you that don't know where Bendigo is, we're located about 150 kilometres northwest of Melbourne and have a population of around 120,000 people, 120 to 130. Our main refugee communities that we work with at the moment are the Karen. So for those of you who don't know what they are from, they're from the Thai-Burma border. So they're a part of the Burmese community, but a sub-community. So the Karen are the people that, the culture that is most affected by, I guess, the civil war that's going on over there at the moment and is continuing. It's actually, I guess, got a lot worse over the last couple of months, as you guys might have seen on the news. We also have some Hazara community people, so some Afghan refugees, and also we have what we call an emerging community of South Sudanese people. So how Bendigo has grown in this area is, as I said, we got our first population in 2007, or our first arrival in 2007, and current estimates put our refugee populations at the moment, we have around 3,000 Karen refugees, and around 250 Hazara community, and as I said, what we call an emerging community of South Sudanese. So people are starting to relocate to Bendigo from the South Sudanese community, as opposed to being directly settled here. Now, our Karen community, you'll hear me probably refer to them most of the time during this presentation because they are our largest. We work across the whole board, but I guess having a community of around 3,000 people, it is the community that access our services the most. In terms of our work with people from refugee communities, what we've noticed is that obviously their health and well-being needs exist in a complex environment in which the pre and post-arrival experiences have profound impacts on their health and well-being, and also their ability to integrate successfully and develop pathways for meaningful contribution. BCHS have obviously over the past 12 years done some things good, but also had many things where we've failed and have learned from that. But where I guess Bendigo's been really lucky is we started with a blank canvas. So we've had no preconceived ideas, and our work with these communities has grown and thrived over the past 12 to 13 years. So I just wanted to talk about some of the challenges, especially around the gambling work. I guess what I wanted to do was put it in context of our gambling work that we've done over the last 12 months, but also I guess in terms of COVID as well. And some of the barriers that we identified across the way, the journey in which people are prevented from engaging with services. And I guess one of the main, and which is experienced across all cultures and communities, is language barriers. And when I talk about language, I just don't talk about different dialects. I'm talking about terminology and misinterpretation of body language as well. So for a lot of our communities, what we say in English is not easily translated into other languages, and the terminology we use cannot be translated. So for us, a lot of our work has been identifying or making sure that we engage with community to identify these language barriers, and not just use language support, but use bicultural workers. So our work is very much grounded in being supported by workers from each culture. We look at cultural norms in terms of the way we work. We recognise that a lot of our communities have a fear of authority, so any work we do with them needs to be, as Susan mentioned earlier, but has to be community-based, and it has to be directed by leaders and community members. We try and build literacy in community, understanding of service pathways. We try to address the practical barriers such as transport, cost, all of those sort of things. We need to make sure our models are care culturally appropriate, and we recognise that there is a reluctance to engage with services because of concern that people will be judged or stereotyped based on where they come from. Our communities have a large fear that they will be deported back to their countries of origin if they are to, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, you'll have to excuse me. As Shane mentioned, I haven't been well, so my brain's not working 100% well this morning, but our communities are worried they will be returned to their place of origin if they are to identify conditions that they feel are stigmatised, particularly around gambling or mental health issues. So for us, it's making sure that communities feel safe and supported. So I guess our key recommendations that we work on in terms of engaging with community is communication. So all of our work is directed by community leaders, or is, I guess, supported by community leaders across the board. We use our religious leaders, our bicultural workers, and our service providers that are recognised and trusted by community in order to, I guess, build that rapport with our community. So an example of this will be with our gambling work. When we first started working with the VRGF, it was identified by our Karen and our Afghan leaders that they felt gambling was becoming an issue within the community, and their ability to access resources was limited. There was nothing in language, and anything that was in language, they found it hard to find, or had, again, because of digital literacy, which has also been mentioned throughout the presentations this afternoon, their ability to find it online was limited. So then what we've done is work with those leaders to identify their main areas of concern, and then engaged with community through, we used our English language schools, we used our youth groups, we used our churches, and we also used community festivals. So we use a lot of already pre-arranged or pre-available sources to engage with community. We used our neighbourhood hubs to, I guess, get to the coalface of what's happening within community and identify need and concern. In doing that too, we find we're able to build a lot of trust within community, and they recognise that we have a cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity to their need. We always try and make sure we're present at cultural festivals. So an example is our Karen community have a wrist tying ceremony every year, and we all the workers who work in that area become or attend that festival. And what that helps to do is the community to see our faces, see our presence, and understand that we respect and want to work with them in a culturally sensitive way. So we use those forums to talk to communities to identify need. Then what we do is we start to develop resources, or we start to develop the information that's needed. And as I mentioned earlier, we employ bicultural workers. So we employ people from community to do that work. And in doing that, we're able to look at the literacy levels. We're able to look at the mediums in which we, I guess, we release information. So during COVID, as Rita pointed out earlier, our communities were really struggled because there was no information in language for them, and for them to understand the ever-changing landscape of what was happening with COVID was really difficult. So it was really important that we quickly responded to that, and what we did was develop a resource hub where people knew how, and then we taught communities how to access their resource hub, in which we provided mainly audio-visual information, because the other thing with a lot of these communities, having grown up in refugee camps, is they have low literacy levels in their own language. So then adding on top of that the complexities of trying to learn the English language, it becomes quite complicated. So we rely heavily, and also within our gambling work, on audiovisual resources. We do a lot of videos or podcasts or radio telecasts, as Rita mentioned earlier. They also do, which we've found has had great success. So we look at literacy levels, we build those resources, and we make sure they're culturally responsive. One of the things with our gambling work is that we identified that a lot of our Karen and Afghan community were using pokies prior to COVID, obviously, before they shut down, as a place of comfort. They were going there for the food, for the company. It was somewhere that they were able to go, and the stresses of relocating, of their pre-lived experience, didn't seem as important. So those areas had become an area of comfort for them. So that comes back to a lot of the trauma and torture they've experienced. So what we also do is engage our trauma and torture counsellors or our trauma and torture team in responding to need and responding to, I guess, concern. We try and make sure our service models are flexible. Like I said, we tend to go to community. We don't ask them to come to us too much. So we go to places of worship. We go to community gatherings to launch those resources. So our gambling resources, we have linked very heavily with the local TAFE to go to our EAL classes to talk to community about gambling and give them the opportunity to watch our videos and ask questions in language. And we also make sure that everything we do is evidence-based, as with all of these programs. So all of our planning and our provision is heavily evaluated, and when things work, that's awesome. But when they don't, we relook at it and try to re-navigate how we do that. Honestly, the last 12 months have been challenging, I guess, as with everyone. And what we have learned is that our community is very resilient. They have built a knowledge base and have probably moved through COVID, probably better than some of us, but we've also learned a lot about how to engage with community. And I guess the biggest challenge, and I hope it has been for everyone, or I think it has been for everyone working in this space, is digital literacy. So what it has highlighted to us is the need for increased work in this space. Yeah, look, I've lost track of time, but I'm hoping I haven't gone too long, and if anyone's got any questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan, for still being able to attend today and giving us that presentation. Again, I think it just reinforces to me how important to do this work it is to be embedded in community and to understand community. Another key takeaway from what you were just describing too, which we all need to do in our work, is to learn from the things that don't work as well as the things that do. I think that's really critical, and it's a focus of our work around our prevention program particularly. So let's try and build capacity within communities. Let's try and support communities, but also let's be conscious of, well, if we've tried one thing, let's perhaps try another from time to time as well. Now we do have about 5 minutes to go in this session, so I do have a few questions that have come through. What I'll also undertake to do with support from my good colleague Erin is if we don't get to a particular question, and we probably won't get to them all, we'll make contact with the presenter to whom the question's been addressed and get a response back over email to people who've asked those questions. If I can go to a question that I've got here, which I think was actually from Jen at Brimbank for Mandy, and it's certainly something that we've seen in a couple of different communities that we work with. Mandy, the question is, are loan sharks an issue with the Chinese community in your experience?
Definitely, that is one of the issue, and not just in the Chinese community. Based on my understanding, Vietnamese community also have that same issue as well. And usually we will saying that set up the payment plan is possibly the only option, because loan shark is sitting outside the declaration. So, well, they usually present themselves as my friend. The client say is my friend, actually lending the money to me. So that's why they will say it's fine, I can handle it, they're easy to talk, all this kind of stuff. but because that is come with the, they will become with a very high interest. So I always suggest the client saying that, well, look, this is the payment plan we can set up, and then you talk to your friends, see if they're willing to accept that, and make sure every single time you make the payment back to your friend, make sure that is recorded as well. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mandy. Look, probably time for one more quickly. This is from our own Crystal to Michael at SSI. Michael and Jaynelle, what type of research do you think would be helpful in the space between intersectionality and provision of services to community?
Sorry, Zhang, can you repeat the question, please? Because I missed part of it.
It's from Crystal, who works in our research and evaluation team, and she's asking what kind of research do you think would be helpful in building that understanding of intersectionality at the community service delivery end? What sort of research would support your work?
It's very important, I think, for us to know the gaps, you know, and which community hasn't been targeted yet and haven't been done much with it. So that's why we've been very selective of the communities that we're going to be working with. So those community probably haven't been exposed to any program yet, or might be part of the community. So that's why it's very important to find out if there is any gaps any gaps that we can fill and we can target within our program. So that's why we've been looking to the research, and we've been contacting different agencies to make sure that we're not doubling up the same service. So yeah, we're trying to reach people who are really in need and haven't and not much has been done, you know, to assist them understanding the harm of the gambling. And yeah, but because some of them probably they've been involved in gambling, but nobody knows because nothing much has been done within those communities.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. It is a very new.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned also.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to be really quick, but say yeah, we need to do more data collection as well on what the current gaps are and how we can fill those. And so in terms of like even co-designing like a more accurate therapeutic response as well, and trying to find out, you know, what community understandings are there already within the gambling harm space. Yeah.
Thank you both. We've gone to the end of our session today. As I said, there are several other questions that people have put into the chat. Erin will contact those presenters to which those questions are addressed and come back with a question. Can I just quickly again say thank you to everyone who's come to us today to share their expertise and their experience, to get that real sense from people of what's occurring at the community level. That's critical information for us at the Responsible Gambling Foundation, but I think it's also really good to have those opportunities to share different experiences and perhaps to learn from each other, and I really hope that everyone's been able to do that. Can I thank all our speakers, Susan, Liss, Jen, Rita, Michael, Jaynelle, Mandy and Megan. It's just been great to have an opportunity to bring everyone together in this virtual environment. I really do hope people have gained some insight. They can go back to people in other parts of metropolitan and regional Victoria and perhaps get more information, share more experience. Again, thank you everyone for your attendance today. I hope the rest of your Monday goes well, and we'll be having a few more of these Gambling Harm in Mind events over the course of the next week or so. But thank you so much for helping us kick off the program today. It's been a fantastic session. I hope you all have a lovely week. See you again.